Good afternoon. My name is Skylar Martin. I am an enrolled member of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans and a descendant of the Oneida Nation. I am also a patient navigator serving American Indians and Alaskan Natives with the Mayo Clinic Comprehensive Cancer Center. I'll be moderating this session. This is the first of a two-part series on nutrition and cancer prevention in American Indian and Alaska Native communities. We want people on this webinar to know that this session is being recorded so individuals who are not able to join us for this live session can watch it later. If you have questions related to this webinar topic, please type them in the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We will answer questions as time allows at the end of the session. I will now hand it over to Angie Murad, a patient educator at the Stephen and Barbara Slaggie Family Cancer Education Center at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Angie is also a registered and licensed dietitian.
Thanks, Skylar. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So for this webinar today, I just wanted to make sure that this presentation and recognize that this presentation would not be possible with the help of Skylar Martin, our moderator, and also Trudy Jackson. Trudy was also a patient navigator here in our Cancer Education Center, but now she's a community engagement coordinator, but she is also serving American Indian and Alaska Native patients at the Mayo Clinic Comprehensive Cancer Center in Arizona. And I want it to be known that I am a white woman who is a dietitian, and I have by no means claiming to be an expert in traditional foods or customs. But my goal with this presentation is to provide evidence-based nutrition recommendations, and with that, practical approaches that can be implemented into your daily life. So glad you could join us. So, and with that being said, I just want to make sure that you know that this webinar is not intended or implied to be a substitute for personal medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always work with your physician or qualified healthcare provider when adjusting any type of medications, supplements, or make any major lifestyle changes. Okay, so as we get started, I just want to briefly talk about Mayo Clinic Connect. It is a digital platform where patients, family members, and caregivers can connect with one another and get evidence-based information and connect with other people in the community. So our Cancer Education Center has a blog on Connect, which a blog specifically has more information on it rather than just connecting with community members. And I put in the chat the link for the blog. So if you'd like to follow our cancer education blog, I encourage you to do that so you can also find other webinars and classes that we offer in our Cancer Education Center, whether that's in person or virtually. So please check that out. Okay, then first of all, I'd like to start out with our learning objectives for today. I want to talk about and help you understand the American Indian and Alaska Native history and its impact on the health of its community. And I want you to walk away with at least 2 factors that may increase the risk for cancer, and name 3 nutrition strategies for cancer prevention. It's important to start out to recognize the historical traumas that are interrupted the deep relationship to hunting and growing indigenous foods and medicines. Although American Indians and Alaska Natives make up only approximately 2% of the US population, they suffer from some of the highest rates of poverty, food insecurity, which is just defined as a lack of consistent access of enough food for every person in a household to live an active, healthy life. And they also suffer from a lot of diet-related diseases. So the culture and the traditional ways have been severely disrupted by colonialism, the loss of land, and due to policies like assimilation, relocation, and tribal termination. And this has resulted in historical trauma that has impacted the health and well-being of the entire population. The trauma is held close and is passed on to future generations. I use this image of the medicine wheel, also known as the sacred hoop, to to represent different, and it's represented by different tribes in different ways. But usually these similar colors are represented within the medicine wheel. So it's fundamentally, it may be used differently, but fundamentally it is just to represent the alignment of the body, mind, emotion, and spirit. And to also, because of the circle shape, it represents that interconnectivity of all of one's being, including the connection with the natural world. And by no means am I wanting to convey that the social determinants of health are sacred to anything like the medicine wheel, but I just wanted to put this slide in to also represent how many things are connected to one's health. So the social determinants of health have a major impact on people's health, their well-being, and their quality of life. A couple of nutrition-related examples of how the social determinants of health might be, for example, education. And it isn't necessarily the education that one obtains. For example, someone who even has perhaps a master's degree may not have higher health literacy. And how that may impact somebody is that if they have a cancer diagnosis, they may not understand the treatment or the words that the care team is using, and that can also lead to the way someone copes with that diagnosis. But a more nutrition-related social determinant of health might be someone's environment. So for example, the neighborhood that they live in or the area that they live in. So if someone lives in a very rural location and has many miles to travel to get to a grocery store, and they only have as their nearest grocery store a convenience store, they may not have access to fruits, vegetables, and so that can have an impact on their health. If they rely on convenience type foods at convenience stores, those foods may be low in nutrients and have an impact on their health. So just wanted to mention that. And often people think of the social determinants of health as being something just healthcare, but it really is much more than that. So that's my intention of discussing this today. Switching gears a little bit, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what is cancer. It's thought of oftentimes as a single disease, but it really is a group of over 200 diseases. And it begins in the cells, and more specifically in the DNA of cells. So in cells, the DNA has a specific job or a blueprint, you could call it, that, for example, skin cells know that they need to do certain things in the skin or hair, or bone cells have a specific thing that they need to do. And all cells have that specific function. What I find amazing is that we have over 37 trillion cells in our body. But when we have a cancer diagnosis, what happens is that there is damage to that DNA or our genes. So it loses its direction. That blueprint kind of goes haywire in that those cells may not stop growing. They may grow rapidly or forget to die. That's just a normal progression of cells, that over time they die and then new cells are formed. So they may accumulate in a certain area and form what we call a tumor. And they may even invade neighboring organs and travel to far organs and may grow in other places. And we often call that when a cancer metastasizes. So what factors increase the risk for cancer? As people age, just because the blueprint kind of may not be as well versed, and it may go not do the specific function. There are also things like environmental factors that may also cause or increase our risk for cancer, like chemicals in our environment, occupational exposure, or being exposed to certain viruses. And then there's also our lifestyle. So If we don't eat certain types of foods, which I'm going to talk about, that may increase our risk for cancer. And then if we expose ourselves to certain substances like tobacco, more non-ceremonial tobacco, or expose ourselves to alcohol, that may increase our risk. And then other lifestyle factors by getting a lot of exposure to sun might also increase our risk too. So more specifically, in American Indian and Alaska Natives, what is their risk for cancer? They do experience much higher rates of getting several kinds of cancer like lung, colorectal, liver, stomach, and kidney cancers when compared to non-Hispanic white people in the United States. And there are also important differences in the rate of getting certain kinds of cancers within different regions where American Indian and Alaska Native people live. They do also experience lower survival rates. So because it's detected later, and then in all types of cancer in the United States, we know that about 5 to 10% of certain cancer types are caused by genetics. So kind of what we're born with, and about more than 90% are determined by lifestyle choices. So we have a big opportunity by making some lifestyle changes, but again, there might be things too in regards to the social determinants of health that may make it more challenging so it might not only be just it might be the conditions that we're living in that may expose us to more certain types of cancer too. So ways to lower cancer rates. This is for everyone. The most effective way is to have access to screening. So again, kind of focusing on that social determinants of health. If we don't have access to healthcare, or we have to travel very far, we may not be able to get into doing some of those cancer screening, which leads to detecting cancers later. And when we know when we detect those cancers earlier, we have better outcomes. And then also having access to preventive healthcare services and programs like getting mammograms, colonoscopies, again, having access and getting access to those. And then also having access to programs that promote healthy living and lifestyle, like eating, maintaining a healthy weight, and then being able to exercise and have access to certain services like smoking cessation programs. So here I want to talk a little bit about some strategies to lower cancer rates specifically through nutrition practices. So I have 6 nutrition strategies to consider to help lower the rates. And then after those, each one of those strategies, I have some applications on how you might be able to put those into practice throughout your daily life. So the first strategy is indigenous food systems. And I'm referring to food systems as the path of food that takes specifically from the earth to the plate. So this really encourages the return to promote the preservation of culture as well as access to healthy traditional foods within American Indian and Alaska Native communities. All provides food. It also provides food sovereignty too, or the right to control where and how to get food. So instead of relying on European foods that provide little nutritional value, for example, like fry bread, it really encourages more fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, plants, or traditional type foods. And it encourages hunting, gardening, and traditional food preparation too. So also sharing that knowledge that's been passed on by generations, but because things have disrupted this, may not be sharing that knowledge. And even in my next, our next part of our webinar series, I'll talk a little bit more about how to implement this with community gardens or community markets and things like that. And I know that this may look differently depending on where you're located. So it may not be for everyone, but that's just an idea because of climate, different places where people are living, but just I want to touch on that a little bit more in depth in the second part of this webinar series. So I'm very visual. I don't know if you are too, but wanted to also put this, my native plate, which is from the Indian Health Services, which shows a plant-based diet that fills half the plate with vegetables. You'll notice on the left, and then a quarter of the plate with a grain, possibly wild rice, or you could have some kind of bread like cornbread. You could also fit in this quarter of the plate starchy vegetables like corn or peas or winter squash. Those would be considered more starchy vegetables and can fit in there. Then the other quarter at the bottom on the right would be for protein sources. So they could include things like deer, bison, fish, or plant sources like beans of protein. And when I think of animal proteins, think about the size of a deck of cards after it's been cooked, because it does shrink a little bit when it's been cooked. And then also included on there is a side of fruit and beverages like water that don't include extra calories. And I want to also say that you don't have to include all food groups, but this is just kind of showing how they all might fit into a meal. And I also want to point out too that this image also addresses portion control. So this entire plate is like a 9-inch plate. And I'll just speak to the fact that mini plates nowadays are much larger. So just keeping that in mind in how big your plates are. So it's kind of interesting to measure your plate and see how big it is. It's crazy how big some of them are nowadays. So I mentioned this, a plant-focused diet. What does that mean? So it includes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans or legumes, anything not coming from an animal source. And although there is no one particular food that can replace everything else, if we did, we'd only be eating that food. But we do know that following a plant-focused diet, or that includes, like I said, fruit, vegetables, and grains, at least half of them being whole grains. And again, at the second part of the webinar series that's on the 18th, I will talk a little bit about how to identify whole grains. They have many health benefits, and not just possibly lowering the risk for certain types of cancer, but they can also help with blood sugar control. They can also help with managing weight too. So these foods include fiber. So fiber takes our body longer to digest, so it can keep us satisfied longer. We don't feel as hungry. They also include things like antioxidants, phytochemicals, and other nutrients. And also an added bonus is that most plant foods are low in fat and low in calories, and they contain no cholesterol because they don't come from an animal. So let's take a closer look at some of these nutrients. So these are just an example of a few plant focused foods. So antioxidants, they are certain vitamins and minerals found in plant foods. Antioxidants are thought to prevent cancer and other illnesses by blocking damaging chemical reactions in the body. So there's something called like free radicals that can damage our DNA. Remember, that's what sometimes may cause cancer. So these antioxidants can may help prevent some of that damage. And you'll notice too, the variety of the colors of the different types of foods. So orange, green, red, all of those different types of things provide different nutrients, antioxidants, and I'll talk a little bit about phytonutrients too. So, so really when maybe you used to hear that eating the rainbow, it really is important to get a variety. And often people ask me, well, what about antioxidant supplements? So like vitamin C, vitamin E, you see listed. Well, really, there are several reasons that this really isn't a good idea. These nutrients, the nutrients that are found in food interact with each other to protect us from cancer and other illnesses. When a nutrient is isolated, specifically in a pill form, it loses this interaction. And I would even have to say that sometimes we might not even know all the things that are in foods that interact. They almost have what we call like a synergistic effect that we may not know about, that give us even more of a boost of protection. So So it's better to get your antioxidants and other nutrients from the foods itself. So just wanted to point that out because often people ask about that. So phytochemicals. These are also found in plant foods. So some like flavonoids, which are in berries, citrus fruits, and tea, lignans. Again, you hear whole grains. So like brown rice, whole wheat bread. Whenever something has whole in a certain type of grain, that's going to be a whole grain that you want to include. Flax seeds also have lignans. Isoflavones are soy foods. Isothiocyanates are cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, including those in our diet too. And I would say if you don't consume a lot of fruits and vegetables or foods that are higher in fiber, it's good to slowly introduce them into your diet. It just helps you feel less bloated and less uncomfortable because if you suddenly increase them, you don't feel as comfortable. And also making sure you drink plenty of water too, and slowly increase them over time. And so phytochemicals is just essentially the word phyto means plant. So they're naturally occurring chemicals in these plant foods. And I went over a couple of them. And again, these also act like antioxidants, and they produce certain things called enzymes which deactivate carcinogens or things that may cause cancer. And they also prevent cancer cell replication. So if they're growing over time, they may help prevent or slow that down. This slide is just also talking about the difference between the two plates. So for example, I mentioned that a lot, including more fruits and vegetables in the diet, they're just naturally low in calories. The foods on the plate on the right, actually there's more than one plate, has less calories than just the hamburger on the left. Doesn't mean you can't eat a hamburger, but just showing you how much more you can eat and lower calories when you add an apple, carrots, whole grain bread, you see tomato on the sandwich, soup that's packed with vegetables, and a glass of water. So it just really goes to show you that you can eat a whole lot more and feel satisfied with it. But again, not to say you can't have a hamburger, it's just to kind of have that visual. So application, how can we put this into practice? The indigenous, whether it's indigenous food systems, which I'll touch more on that second part of the webinar, but more plant-focused eating. So it's just looking at your meals throughout the day. Could you include a fruit or a vegetable with a meal? Just kind of gaining awareness. Could I include those? Maybe reducing the amount of meat. Remember, we talked about the size of a deck of cards. If you're making a stew, could you add more vegetables to it, less meat? So that's one way. And even, for example, adding frozen vegetables kind of towards the end of, a lot of the images were fresh fruits and vegetables, but they can certainly be frozen, and those are just as nutritious as fresh. And they actually, you don't waste as much. And then even considering meatless dinner meal during a week, and just kind of exploring that and seeing what you might like to try. So strategy number 2, achieving a healthy weight. So with this, why is it important to maintain a healthy weight? It's not just vanity, it's more than that. It's with just our health. So as seen on the slide, several types of cancers are associated with carrying excess body weight, 12 to be exact on there. And there are several ways that carrying excess weight can possibly lead to cancer. We used to think that fat tissue in the body didn't do much in the body, but we are realizing that it is active tissue in the body because it can increase hormone levels, such as like estrogen, which can promote the growth of breast and endometrial cancers. Also, carrying excess weight or having fat cells in the body, in excess, they make a hormone called leptin, and high levels of leptin can promote inflammation in the body. Now, we often think of some kinds of inflammation, like if we cut ourselves, we see it's like red and it's healing and that's inflamed. But certain inflammation within the body is linked to chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and it can possibly encourage cancer cell growth. So that's why it's also important to try to decrease weight. And then fat tissue in the body doesn't respond very well to a certain hormone called insulin. When we eat food, that food's digested and it's broken down into sugar put into our bloodstream. The insulin this hormone is released, and it's like the key that brings the energy or that sugar in the bloodstream into our tissues. When we carry excess weight, that fat tissue, does not respond well to insulin. So the insulin builds up into the bloodstream. And then we know that increased levels of insulin may raise the risk for breast, prostate, and colon cancer. So just wanting to just let you know of what's happening with that. And I wanted to just talk about the term body mass index. We often hear that, and we don't like to classify people by a number, but the body mass index is often used as in the clinical setting, just to determine someone where they fall within, based on their weight in kilograms divided by the square of their height in meters. So being either at a high or a low body mass index may be related to certain health issues. And I already spoke about the increased risk for certain types of cancers. If you're classified as obese in that orange in your BMI, you're not necessarily doomed by any means, but just wanting to be aware that can increase your risk. And even if you never reach your normal or quote unquote ideal weight, any amount of weight loss is really helpful. And there are several studies that have shown that weight loss within 5 to 10% of someone's current body weight is associated with health benefits. So numbers are important so we can see where people are moving and trying to move in the right direction into a healthier, not only for cancer risk, but other types of chronic diseases too that are associated with weight. So just wanting to talk a little bit about why body mass index is used. It's also very easy to do in the clinical setting too. So with application, how can we achieve a healthy weight? I talked a little bit about the My Native Plate, is just even thinking about what am I eating on a 9-inch dinner plate? Because again, that can kind of, the bigger our plates are, the more food we will put on it. And then also, how does my plate look in comparison with half my plate being vegetables, a quarter being that grain, and then the other quarter being protein source. And then I also put on here tracking the time it takes to eat a meal. I touch on that just because when people, our society, we're always in a hurry. So, and that often includes eating quickly. So if we eat quickly, we often eat more food. It takes our stomach about 20 minutes to even receive signals to our brain that we're starting to feel satisfied. So if we can eat more slowly, we can actually realize that we're starting to get to that point of feeling satisfied. So just, it's kind of an interesting thing to try, just seeing how long it takes to eat a meal and seeing if you can increase the amount of time it takes, and just wonder and kind of play with that a little bit and see if you may perhaps eat a little bit less. Another trick too, I've talked to people about and also do at home too, is keeping food on the counter instead of on the table. Again, that kind of makes you take a pause and think if you want to get seconds. So just another thing to, if you're struggling to lose weight, just some tips and tricks to try at home. The next strategy I want to talk about is limiting red and processed meats. So first, even to define what are red and processed meats. So red meats would be things like beef, pork, lamb, mutton, deer, elk, buffalo, and antelope. And processed meats are any meat that's preserved by smoking, salting, curing, or adding preservatives like nitrates or nitrites. And this just helps preserve them longer. Some examples would be like sausages, pepperoni, bologna, ham, bacon, hot dogs, and salami. So what is the link between red and processed meat and cancer? So research over the years have determined certain things found in these compounds. So first, I want to mention that particular type of cancer that's associated with red and processed meats is specifically colorectal cancer. So in red meat, there's is higher than poultry and seafood in heme iron. So that's what gives it kind of that red color. This particular form of iron can lead to the production of certain kinds of things called free radicals that damage DNA and promote the formation of certain compounds, which can lead to damage within the gut and possibly lead to cancer. The other thing that with meats too is when it's cooked at high temperatures or smoking or grilling meats, and they can produce certain cancer-causing compounds called heterocyclic amines or HCAs and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons or PHAs. These compounds are not unique to red meats. So alone, they don't really explain the difference in the risk from red meat compared to poultry and seafood, but just some things that they've noticed, the difference with that. So, and then there's emerging evidence that suggests that red meat may also increase the cancer risk by promoting chronic low-grade inflammation in the body, again, talking about that inflammation. And that eating habits that include high amounts of red meat seem to affect certain bacteria that's in the gut. And I would say that's a newer area of research. We're just on the cusp of learning how much our gut bacteria influences our health. So it's really interesting to hear how red meat influences that. And that too, when the red meat is digested, it can increase certain microbes that may promote this inflammation in the gut. Then with nitrates and nitrites, they're added, like I said, to keep processed meats fresher longer, and they are considered cancer-causing compounds. So just wanted to mention that, and to really treat it more, those types of foods like a treat, and not eat them very often at all. So just really that all of these chemicals can possibly damage the cells in the colon and the rectum. And as damage accumulates over time, it can increase the cancer risk. So I also wanted to touch on wild game. Wild game meats are typically higher in protein. They are lower in fat and lower in calories than farm-raised animals. So this is great. And when raised in their natural environment, they may contain other nutrients like fats, like omega-3 fatty acids, and also have less saturated fats. So that being said, if you have the opportunity to eat more wild game, that would be a better alternative. But again, keeping it within the amounts that, the next slide, I'll actually talk about the specific amounts. But again, kind of, if you're not wanting to track ounces, just kind of thinking about the quarter of your plate for protein. So what I always want to know, okay, what's the bottom line? So consuming high amounts of red meat and processed meats does increase the risk of colorectal cancer. So the recommended amount is no more than 18 ounces. So if you think about it, about 4 portions of about 4 ounces of cooked meat, just a little bit more than the size of a deck of cards. So again, it's not saying you can't have it, but it's looking at how are you eating, how much of red meat are you eating right now? How much processed meats are you eating right now? And with processed meats, it's really talking about limiting that intake. Like I said, really just trying to think of it like a treat. That's the recommendation from the American Institute for Cancer Research. So how can we apply this? So again, it's more of like a stepwise approach. I put more things on here for application just because sometimes this is hard thing for people to reduce. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. It's hard to make change, especially when it comes to food. So one thing is to marinate meat. And if you can marinate meat for 30 minutes or more, it may help break down the proteins so you don't have to cook it as long as on higher temperatures. And to marinate meat, you can use mixtures of some type of acid, like a vinegar, lemon juice, and some spices. And then that just, you don't have to cook it as long. Another thing, another trick that you could do too is to partially pre-cook the meat in the oven. And then you can cook it in lower temperatures on the grill to reduce the direct flame exposure. Remember, when you're charring high temperatures of meat, you're causing some of those compounds that are going to form some of those compounds that may increase risk of cancer. So like I said, you can partially pre-cook the meat in the oven, then put it on the grill. So you still get a little bit of the grill taste. And then just reducing the meat portions. Think of that little bit more than a deck of cards each serving, 4 servings per week. Consume those processed meats like treats. And then even thinking outside the box, could I have plant-based proteins like beans or lentils, fish, or chicken as other protein sources? So just a few things to consider. For strategy 4 and 5, I talk a little bit about limiting sugar sweetened beverages and processed foods. So I put these two together. They kind of, I thought, fall in nicely together. So with sugar sweetened beverages, these would be things like regular soda, coffee drinks, and fruit drinks. And studies indicate that liquid carbohydrates, such as like the sugar sweetened beverages, are less filling than solid foods. So again, you doesn't take long to digest. They kind of pass through. So people continually feel hungry after drinking them, despite them being higher in calories. So we really just don't notice how many calories we might be consuming in the way of beverages. And then also too, how can I identify when something has sugar in it? Sugar comes in many forms, like you can read on the label, it says sugar, maybe cane sugar, brown sugar, honey. People often think, well, honey's better. It still is an added sugar. It may be, depending on where it comes from, it may be less processed, but just be mindful that it may add additional calories. Cane juice, maple syrup, molasses, sucrose. So there's many names. And I've often seen on some packages where they have organic sugars. There's still an added sugar. It just has, it's processed a little less, but it still has added sugars and added calories. So the other thing too is that I just wanted to point out is, I found this interesting, is if you just drink one 12-ounce can of sugar sweetened beverage every single day, just one, and not cut back on other calories anywhere else, you could gain up to 15 pounds over 3 years. So just to keep that in mind. The other thing too that people also ask is if they drink juice, that's fine, but just make sure that it's 100% juice and keep your portion to just 4 ounces one time a day. If you think, I often use this example too, of an 8-ounce glass of juice is equivalent to drinking 3 medium oranges, like just sitting down and eating 3 medium oranges. So it could really add up over time. Yes, it's a fruit, but it just, like I said, it doesn't fill you up and it doesn't have a lot of fiber because it's just in a liquid form. So you may tend to eat a little bit more. So then when we just talk about processed foods, often these foods have sugar, salt, and fat, what I call kind of the trifecta of things that taste so yummy, but have little nutrients in them. So again, it's not that you can never have them, but just thinking about how often am I having them throughout the day. Limit common processed foods like chips, cookies, candy bars, desserts, processed baked goods. And then some breakfast cereals are quite high in sugar, and even certain types of yogurts are high in sugar. And then fried foods can also are considered processed food as well. So just to mention too that often we rely on processed foods because they kind of help us prepare something quickly, but I'll suggest even something a little bit other things that you can include that could be quote unquote processed but are healthier. So how can we limit sugar sweetened beverages and processed foods? So again, it's looking at how much of these things am I having throughout the day? Can I reduce the size? Maybe I want to start out that way. If you have maybe a coffee beverage in the morning and you find that it has a lot of sugar, add sugars in it, maybe instead of getting the large size, could I start with a medium and then work my way down to a small? And then maybe after that, could I reduce the amount of times that I'm having it throughout the week? So kind of that stepwise approach. So it just doesn't feel like we're going from all the time to not at all, because it's really hard to sustain changes if it's a sudden change. And then maybe even considering drinking water flavored with fruit to giving it natural sweetness. And then two, finding other processed foods that may reduce the time in the kitchen, but they might be a little bit healthier. So for example, instead of regular white rice, maybe instant brown rice. It has a little bit more fiber and a little bit more nutrients, but it can be prepared quickly. Things like pre-cut salads or frozen vegetables I mentioned, without added sauces or different seasonings. If it's just regular frozen vegetables, you control the amount of seasonings that you want on there. And even considering like every once in a while, like a rotisserie chicken that you could use in a stir fry. So it's just kind of putting it in, kind of towards the end, you're just heating it up with your frozen vegetables or quickly chopped up vegetables. So, and then other things like relying on time-saving tools in the kitchen, like a slow cooker or different type of tools that just make it a little bit quicker and get things on the table. So the last strategy that I have is limiting alcohol consumption. Studies have found a link between alcohol intake and the risk of getting a number of cancers, such as breast, colorectal, esophageal, liver, mouth, throat, and throat cancers, and cancers of the pharynx and larynx, as well as stomach cancer. So in some kinds of cancers like breast or esophageal, really recommend less than a drink per day. And then the American Institute for Cancer Research says that really if you're not drinking, don't start drinking. So it's just really to encourage people to not start drinking, and if you're not already. And then two, just really wanting that there's certain chemical compounds that are broken down when you consume alcohol that can increase that risk of cancer. So, and it really doesn't matter what type of alcohol you're drinking. So all alcohol is considered similar. So, and that research shows when you drink alcohol, your body breaks it down into a chemical called acetaldehyde, which can damage, again, the DNA in our body. So we really just want to try to avoid it, if at all, having it. So, and how can I limit alcohol consumption? Again, reducing the size of the glass that's used. Often, like the plate size, what I was kind of talking about. If people drink wine, for example, often red wine is the big glass, the wide glasses. If you have a glass that's taller, it kind of tricks our brain to think that we're drinking a little bit more, so you can get away with less. And even in that previous slide, I can just go back to that. These different sizes, like 5 ounces of wine, 12 ounces of beer, and 1.5 of that shot for distilled spirits is considered one standard drink. So just keeping that in mind and working your way down. And then you could still have small amounts of alcohol, maybe adding seltzer to the drink, so to just use less of it. And then oftentimes alcohol is possibly used with who we socialize with, or as a way to manage stress. So it's just finding other ways to socialize with friends or family, and then managing stress too. So finding other techniques to help manage with that. So in conclusion, just really want you to think about the eating pattern or how you eat throughout the day or the week. And are there any opportunities for improvement? Are there one or two of the cancer nutrition, cancer prevention strategies that I talked about that maybe you want to try? And just to mention that healthy eating can look different for each person. So just keeping an open mind with that, and also being gentle with yourself. Making dietary changes can be hard. So that's why I really just try to have people focus on 1 to 2 things that they could focus on to gain confidence with it and also be successful and sustain that change. So just want to leave you with the resources of Connect, which I put in the chat as we began. I also wanted to put the American Indian Cancer Foundation, which is a national nonprofit organization that was established to address the tremendous cancer inequities that are faced by Native communities, and it's Native governed as well. And their mission is to eliminate cancer burdens of Indigenous people through improved access to prevention, early detection, and treatment, and survivor support. And then I mentioned a couple times the American Institute for Cancer Research is also a great resource too.
I'd like to close out the session and let you know that once this webinar has ended, you'll be prompted to take a quick survey. This information is helpful to provide feedback on how we can improve this session or learn what other cancer-related topics you'd be interested in learning about. Thank you.
Just wanted to also mention, I appreciate you talking about the survey because that's really helpful, Skylar, but also too, just wanted to mention our second part of the webinar series too. We'll touch on kind of some nutrition labels, how to read nutrition labels, and some other kind of tricks of the trade to just navigating all of that. So hopefully people can join us for that one as well. But as always, we record them and we put them on Mayo Clinic Connect. That was something I didn't mention, that we put all of our webinars on our video library tab. So you can look for this webinar or others that we've been doing over the past year. Well, with that being said, we hope you can join us for the next session. So hope to see you then, and we appreciate those that were able to join us. Have a great day.